I'd like to welcome you to the July, I don't even know what month it is, I'm sorry, version of the Fayetteville Council of Neighborhoods. And I guess we'll start with introduction of neighborhood representatives. I'm Don Connor with Root School Neighborhood Association.
My name's Ethel Simpson, University Heights.
Craig Crocker, Jennings Plus.
And that's all we've got so far, so.
If you want us to raise any issues with the neighborhood, I have one.
Okay.
Okay. Some neighbors in Jennings Plus asked me to see what I could do at the meeting about dealing with a troublesome neighbor. And
Okay.
as best as I know, I could just make sure that they have all the city contact numbers available to them to contact any violations that they might see from this troublesome neighbor.
What are the troubles?
Oh, it's like, you know, you name it, they're in violation of it. They fight a lot. There's mysterious transactions taking place in front of the house that I've never really understood. I mean, this implies something that we're all familiar with, but the police are there on a regular basis, so I wouldn't think they'd be able to hide anything like that. They've got dogs running free. They've got a stench coming from the property. I mean, it just goes on and on. But other than making available all the contact numbers, I'm not really sure. Once again, they asked me to bring this up. I'm not really sure what else can be done. Any suggestions?
Well, you've got to use your contact numbers, of course. You know, on the dog violations, you call the police department, and they take out the animal control people, and call the police department once again on the funny smells that may be related to manufacture of controlled substance or something. But well, since we have our city attorney here, he can probably.
Well, if they're code violations too, then they could contact planning.
Okay.
Planning will be the ones that would look at if there's a possible zoning code violation.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know what's going on there, but evidently police already know to some extent that there's a problem.
You know, I know we have a lot to talk about tonight. I don't want to take up too much time with this, but I know that when the police do come, which they come often because there's oftentimes something going on, so that they're called. They don't really share too much information with the neighbors. Neighbors ask them, "Hey, what's going on?" and they kind of keep to themselves. And I think that might be a problem for the neighbors to be able to even find out what they're up against. But in any case, okay, let's say
they can ask for the police report. You can do that. I know that.
Okay.
If it's an ongoing undisclosed investigation, then you might not get everything, but oftentimes there'll be a report and the police, and you certainly have a right under the Freedom of Information Act to get a copy of the police report.
I see, okay.
And do you have, I suppose they've called the animal control people?
Oh, yeah. And,
And what else?
constantly, one of the, it's to the point now, and I'll keep this short, but it's to the point now where, people are just saying, just like, at what expense is all of this? The city's got to be paying so much just for these people to be constantly reprimanded for any number of violations.
Once again, we can ask our city attorney. At what point do they declare that a nuisance and do something about it? How many police calls do you have to have at a residence before something is done?
Well, it would be very rare that we would go to the extent of trying to take some action against the property itself. Is this a homeowner or is this rental property?
It's a homeowner.
More likely, this is going to end up in district court, Fayetteville District Court. The city prosecutor works for me, but he's really pretty independent. I just try to keep political pressures away from him and let him do his job. If the police submit reports to him of criminal violations, then he will likely be the one that prosecutes. If it's a more serious violation, then it could go to the county prosecutor and he'd be prosecuted by them.
But I mean, even to get that ball rolling, the neighbors kind of have to nudge this process along?
No, I think that the police will automatically, if they believe a crime has been committed, refer the reports to the prosecutor. However, the citizens can, if they want to, if there's noise problems, things like that, go down to the prosecutor's office and file a complaint themselves, swear out an affidavit that what they've seen and what they believe is a problem. Also, if it is a zoning problem, and sometimes some of these things are, then they would go down and talk to the planning department, and the planning department would then investigate. They would actually send someone out if they thought it was a zoning problem.
I see.
And they would look at that.
Okay, and I mean, aside from the police calls, which typically happen like sometime late at night, to call the planning number, let's say the next day, would just between business hours, they just describe the situation, and that would. In other words, you don't call the planning number at
Not for
11 o'clock.
disturbances, and they would
Yeah.
not be investigating
Right.
disturbances.
Okay.
It would have to be some sort of zoning violation.
Yeah, like the
I don't
smell.
know if there is one.
Right.
Maybe that hadn't happened. I was just
Yeah.
saying if there was a zoning violation,
Okay.
if they, had a lot of junked cars in the front yard, things like that, that would be a zoning violation.
Too many people living in a
Too many
residence.
unrelated people living together.
I think
Okay.
you got
Theoretically, that is a violation that can be
a
prosecuted.
limit of 3,
Frequently is not.
more than 3 unrelated, is it 4? 3?
Well, they're all
Depends
related.
on.
They're all related, so we don't need to go down that road. But
Okay.
okay, thank
So how
you.
about public health for the stench?
Well, that's a good point, because the person most alarmed by the stench is someone whose backyard, she goes right up against it, and she's pregnant, and is worried about
Yeah.
health issues. So yeah, okay, thank you. So anyway, just
Basically, I think just call your alderman and they solve everything. That
Okay.
Don't worry about all those other departments. Just call your alderman and
Okay.
they'll resolve everything.
We will try, you betcha.
And your alderman will have a lot of contact information that you
Yeah.
might not be privy to.
yeah,
But we do have a lot of stuff on the Access Fayetteville website on, the neighborhood.
Yeah.
We've got the list of most of the contacts and,
yeah. It's surprising. I mean, people, they complain amongst themselves, but they don't really want to complain too much to the city, and so I think part of it. I mean, I'm not from Fayetteville, so they asked me, "Why don't you do it? We're too nice. Why don't you do it?"
Well, you can also tell them they can actually file something online if they just don't want to call.
Oh, okay, all
There
right.
is
Like an anonymous thing.
Yeah.
a citizen service, a request for service,
Uh-huh.
and they can complete that online.
I see. Okay, thank you.
and, if it's a code violation, they'll send city code people out there. If it's a zoning problem, which, it's kind of hard to do that unless you got a business running in there or something like that.
Yeah, right. It sounds to me like it's more law enforcement.
Okay.
The neighbors usually have, even if they haven't supported the particular PCD, they're glad to see it because at least they know what is being proposed and they can make their arguments accordingly if they don't like it. So we've gone along and we had many of these proposed throughout the town, and some have been built. All of these have a deadline, so that you've got to get your building permits done, your buildings built, at least in different phases. Sometimes they can go on for a very long time, but there is a time limit on when you must accomplish certain steps, and these time limits are actually done between the planning department and the developer. So the developer agrees to these time frames, and a lot of it comes from the developer themselves. Well, as you know, when the bottom fell out of the real estate market, a lot of these planned zoning developments never got built. Just nothing happened. And so their time that they could be built has expired, so they cannot be built now. Well, that left the city in a kind of a quandary, because we cannot take or have a piece of land that has been zoned where now no one can touch it. If the city continued to do that and refused to rezone, then you all are buying this, because we've made that land totally unbuildable, undevelopable. And obviously, that's not what we want. That wouldn't be fair to the people that own it, and the taxpayers would eventually end up paying for that.
Unless they adhere to the PZD.
The PCD is already expired.
Okay.
They can't do that. Now, they could come back, somebody else could come back and propose the identical PZD with a new timetable. See,
Okay.
zoning doesn't have expiration dates. Zoning is forever until it's changed again. But since the PZD has development rights, like a large-scale development or a preliminary plat, those always have expiration times. And so when you combine them together, then that's where you got your problem. There's
Okay.
many preliminary plats that were approved that were never built. Well, that's not a big deal because they can't be built, but the zoning is still there, so somebody can build according to that zoning in the future. But with the PZD, where they're together, nothing can happen on that land until it is rezoned. And
the-
so,
Excuse
yes,
me.
ma'am.
The original developer, the original holder of the PZD, he can't come back and say, I'd like to start over?
No, they have, in the past, several owners of PZDs have extended the PZD, asked for an extension, but that extension can only go on for a year or two.
I see.
And then after that, the PZD is expired, and even the original owner, if he wanted to do exactly the same thing, would have to come back and present the PZD all over again, even though it'd be the same PZD, both to the Planning Commission and to the City Council for their approval. So that PZD has expired, and now the city is faced with the situation, what do we do? Because we can't leave all these lots in limbo, and usually a PZD is a pretty big space, it's many acres. And so there were several ways that planning looked at this and how can we handle it. One obvious, easy way you'd think would be, well, we'll just revert it back to the original zoning.
Mhm.
And originally, I thought that was probably the best idea.
But there wasn't anything put into the ordinances when the PZDs were formed to do anything
No,
like that.
it was, no, they did not do that, they did not say what would happen, so we had to decide what was gonna happen. And the problem with going back to the original zoning automatically without any thought is that some of these PZDs were placed on property that probably was not very well zoned in the first place. For example, there's one down by the baseball field, the university baseball field, where it was zoned industrial. And then they had a PZD to make it where it'd be multifamily, a little condo. Well, of course, there was condos everywhere in Fayetteville for a while, except they never got built. So they had designed a residential area there, which is much more in keeping with how that area has developed, because there's other residential in that same general area. They do have industrial up on Campbell Soup, a couple blocks, big blocks away across the railroad tracks, but nothing right there, and that's probably a not great place for industrial zoning anymore. And so if we just blindly rezoned it, then we're liable to get some kind of development in there. If somebody develops industrially, that would be very incompatible with how the rest of the area has grown up. And so what planning has done, instead of just blindly having it go back to the way it was, what planning has done is they've looked at what was approved, they've looked at the general area, and they've tried to pick a zone that would be compatible with the area around them, and yet be probably similar to the last zoning decision that was made, which was this PZD. So, for example, on this particular parcel by the baseball field, they zoned it in such a way that actually the same project that had been approved could be built there, basically because of the type of zoning that they chose, and they chose to form-based zoning that would allow the same basic structure that could have been built there, but was not. And they've tried to apply that. Now, in one particular case I know, it was one pretty far out of town, a major residential subdivision, and that didn't get built. Well, all around it was agricultural, and it had originally been agricultural, and they recommended zoning back to agricultural because they felt like that was what was compatible with that area. So that is what planning has done. Now, they make that recommendation, and it goes to the planning commission. And the planning commission then looks at that, and then they can make their recommendation to the city council. Citizens are always involved along the way, especially neighbors. And so then it gets to the city council, and then it's the city council's decision. And it's a legislative decision where they have lots of discretion. After they listen to the neighbors and the planning department and the planning commission, then they make a decision on what they believe is the most appropriate zoning of the land. And they can follow the planning department's recommendation, or they don't have to, and they can partially follow it. If it's a big chunk of land, not everything in that chunk of land needs to be necessarily zoned the same zone. So they could say, well, this part, we agree with the planning department, let's zone it here, but this part over here, well, maybe, we think that the neighbors say that they don't like that, they'd rather see a different zoning, and we're gonna go with a different zoning over here. So the city council has a lot of authority, and we have a city council member here, and I would encourage you to sit up here at the table. We're not all full, and this is pretty casual. Why don't you sit up there so that if you want to make a comment, you can be heard.
Because you'll see me if I run. If I sit up here. Thank you. I'll be happy to.
Well, I'm glad seeing
Thank
all
you.
of them come to this meeting because I
Happy
think
to be here.
More should.
I think it is good for you to be able to listen to the neighborhood leaders.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Glad to see my neighborhood representative here. She always is.
But anyway, the city council has the ultimate authority to do this, and we have several of these plan zoning districts, and the planning department's been trying to go through them in 3 or 4 a month so we don't overload the city council with 12 all at once, and because it's too hard to think about so many different ones all at once. And besides that, the neighbors need to have plenty of time to have input on what they want. And if you put them all together, that would just be
And a few of them are
Yes.
pretty controversial.
and they were some of these plan zoning districts, not all of them, but a few, were controversial even before they were ever passed, and it was passed on a split vote. And now that they weren't built, now they're coming back through, and some of the same issues are still there. And certainly, I think that it's a citizen's right, especially a neighbor's right, to say, I see what planning has done. I know what maybe the owner wants it, the new owner wants it developed this way or zoned this way, but we really think that it should be zoned in this other way. And we know it has to be rezoned, but we think this is a better zoning. This is more compatible with our neighborhood. This is more compatible with the area. And so we feel like this is the proper zoning, and ask the city council to zone it as you want it zoned. And that can be with of course, anytime a zoning comes through, not only these big PZDs, but other ones, citizens are always able to come forward and say that we like or don't like that zoning.
Why doesn't city planning staff look at that when they're originally offering these zones?
I think that they do. I think there's several. There was a PZD that was partly built out on Zion Road, and so they looked at what was built already, and it was mainly single-family housing, and then they looked at what could have been there, and so according to the original PZD, and they figured when the people bought in their houses, they were looking at the PZD because that was all part of a PZD, and so they wanted to try to do something similar to what was anticipated, because people had already used their money and built their homes in anticipation of this PZD looking a certain way, so it wouldn't be fair to make it look much, much different. And
Now, on that particular one, how compatible is that with the surrounding neighborhood?
well, I think it is probably compatible, because if you look, the compatibility issue was decided initially by the city council when they granted the PZD. So at least at that point, the city council said this is compatible, or else they would not have passed the PZD. It doesn't mean that's in stone, right?
Right.
And especially if it was very controversial and a split decision, then obviously that's an issue that is potentially still up in the air.
Now, clarify clarify this for me, when we talk about how these zoning districts have sort of gone away or faded, I'm thinking about, is it Ruskin Heights that's on 45? And it seems to me that, you know, that there are some improvements that, you know.
No,
like-
they put in some infrastructure,
Uh-huh.
and there's
Does
some
that count as-
unimprovements called the grading they did that's eroding all down through our streams.
Well,
But,
you know, I think planning will look, and of course the owner looks, at any infrastructure that's already been installed, because it won't make much sense to jerk out infrastructure, because infrastructure is extremely expensive. And so that I think that they would try to fit, to some extent, the infrastructure that's there, but they are not under any obligation to make it identical to what the original one was in terms of density and also in terms of use. There was some commercial that was going to be in Ruskin Heights. That doesn't mean that at this point the city council must agree that any new commercial would be appropriate there. It's really kind of, it is a new ball game. So it's there's a lot of burden and responsibility on the city council to listen to the neighbors and to planning and to the owner and interested persons, and then make the deter. That's why they get paid the big bucks, to make those hard decisions.
on this particular one though, since you brought up Ruskin, it's the bank that's asking to rezone it,
That is
as
correct.
opposed to an owner that's, you know, got something to do with what's gonna happen. And what they're asking for is the best open shot to do whatever they can get done without having to have any, you know, any guidelines other than we'll build whatever, you know, somebody wants to buy this thing for and build on it. In the proposed zonings that they got on there, you know, it's pretty open-ended. And, you know, those of us who fought that particular PZD, we gained a few small things along the way, and we've lost all those with the PZD failing. Things like left turns into the neighborhoods, and you know, there are several things along that way that are gone
That's correct.
with this. And the proposal the city staff came back with didn't have any of that was there for the neighbors, you know, that we gained during all that.
Be difficult, I think, to try to do that with a straight rezoning as opposed to a planned zoning district where you're looking at everything at once for development. Because a zoning is not a building right. It's as opposed to PZD where you can actually build. You get one of those. With zoning, you get it zoned, then you come back in and do a large-scale development or preliminary plat or something like that in order to build. And so you don't have as much flexibility or as many, you can't put as much on them as you can with someone that's actually going to do the development. I think you have every right to present to the city council what you believe would be the proper zonings on these. You don't have to follow at all what planning department has suggested. You can make all your own suggestions, and or else you can just tweak it a little bit, however you want to do that. But I think that the city council is going to listen to everybody. They're going to listen to planning. They're going to listen, see what the planning commission recommended, but they're also going to listen very closely, I think, to the neighbors and try to do the best by everybody and make the decision on what is the best, most compatible use of this land. And they'll listen to the bank too. I mean, even though the bank might not ever, they want to sell it, obviously, but the owner has certain rights too. I mean, they should certainly be listened to.
Sure, and that's no question, but they have a potential customer that they're trying to lean this toward. And of course, they don't tell us who the customer is, but they say they've got one. But we're dealing with the architects on it, which is, or the engineers on it, Jorgensen and Associates. The neighbors are right now. We're trying to get it tweaked a little bit for the planning commission version before it even comes before them. And we've got several meetings to go. We dealt with this particular PZD for a couple of years, you know, going to meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting and, you know, having to hash over things. And, you know, as neighbors, we're not developers, you know, we had to learn all the rest of the stuff that goes along with this, whether we liked it or not, because, see, when we bought our property and it was zoned the same as our property in that area, we were kind of guaranteed that it wouldn't be different.
You weren't guaranteed, but certainly you could believe it was not going to
We
change.
should have the basic assumption that, you know, maybe it ought to remain the same or something that's really similar, and the PZD was quite dissimilar to the neighborhoods around it, and there are a couple of them. And now, when you look at it, it doesn't even go back to that to start with. It goes back to looking at what they had for PZD. And, you know, I mean, that wasn't part of the original part of the deal when we bought our homes in the area. And a lot of neighbors feel the same way. When you purchase your home, you look at the zoning around it, you look at the available area around it, and if you know, if your home is in the middle of a subdivision or even in the middle of town and it's surrounded by houses that are already built, they know what they're going to get. You know, unless somebody comes in, obviously, and buys up a whole section of land, tears everything down, and starts over. But, you know, then they'd have to go through a lot of hoops to get a PZD or anything else, large-scale development or anything else on that. So, you know, our problems with, once you've fought the fight on getting the PZD in there and you've gotten the best you can get out of the city on it, and, you know, we're the neighbors are pretty good with what's proposed, now we gotta do it again. You know, and that's sort of a slap in the face to the citizenry by the city, because these guys failed. We didn't fail, they did. You know, and now we're having to expend our time and effort to go back and once again do the same thing over again and fight the same fight. And basically, as we were told by the person that's proposing to buy this from the bank, that, well, they're really not gonna try to change too much of it because they have to get the most use out of that land and make the most money that they can.
That's what they would like to do.
Right. And that takes the neighbors out of the equation, you know.
Well, but the city council will keep you in the equation, because even though a lot of times people will say, if they're an owner, that I'm entitled to the highest and best use of my property, the courts have specifically said that is not the only consideration. That's certainly a consideration, what the owner would like to do with their property.
Right.
But that is only one of many considerations that the city council should think about. In fact, and I've written memos to the aldermen to remind them of that fact, and to point to many different things that they should be looking at, including reasonable arguments by the neighbors. And the number one consideration in zoning is compatibility.
Right.
That's not the only consideration.
Right. But it is
But that is number one.
way up there.
And I've I have said that since I've been city attorney for over 10 years now. And I think generally the aldermen try very, very hard to listen to the citizens and to follow that and try to make it as compatible as possible. And obviously, Ruskin Heights is an example where there was not an agreement.
No.
There were many citizens that spoke on both sides of that issue. And so it was a very difficult decision by the city council. And so they just do their best. But I do think that you're absolutely right. It's not just what the bank wants. It's not just maximizing the kind of money they might get. There's many things that the city council should and will look at. And I've always found that the city council, I think, is much more sensitive to what the citizens want than any of the other groups
Then the
involved.
planning
in this.
commission or
That they will
city staff.
listen. No, they're hard decisions to make.
Mhm.
Because back when I was on the city council, it wasn't those black and white issues. Those were real easy. It's when you had rights on both sides. Those are the hard decisions where both sides make good arguments, and you're sitting here and you know that there is no right answer. There's only a more right answer or a more wrong answer from your own perspective. So those are the hard decisions, and it's a lot easier being city attorney. I don't have to make those votes anymore.
Well, and I'd be happy to come to a meeting and listen to you all. We can do that, right? So it's
Oh,
not
sure.
an FOI, I mean, it's not a.
You don't
I've
have too
gone
many
to-
aldermen at
yeah.
once without
But
announcing it to
invite
the
us.
press.
I mean, I think when you talked about having several more meetings,
Well,
I've
we've
gone to
asked our
couple
aldermen and they
neighborhood meetings.
hadn't bothered to show up.
we'll all vote. So
I think they know they're going to
invite
hear
me.
it later on. Anyway.
Yeah, they know they're gonna
And not
hear
the
it
ones
later
that come to
on.
the neighborhood meeting, who obviously care about neighborhoods a lot. No, everybody can't come to every meeting, and I
Well,
feel city
and
council members are,
you gotta have-
working people too, and so.
You also have to have restrictions on how many city council people.
Yeah.
But I would just say, be sure to invite us and
I
make
will.
sure that we're very educated on your neighborhood
I will on
issues.
that one,
Yeah.
but you know, even looking at these other ones, there's so many of them that don't have our exact same problem we have with the PZD that we're talking about, but they all have considerations for those PZDs because it affects their neighborhoods directly. And I just wonder if there's any way that the ordinance can be changed. You know, if who even starts that ball? The city council members have to bring up an ordinance change, right?
Well, they certainly are the ones that make the change. Sometimes it's presented by staff before, and the city council just considers
Then it has to go through
But they're the
ordinance
ones,
review.
it doesn't, well, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. If it's a change to the Unified Development Code, it usually starts at the Planning Commission level, because they're the ones that usually are applying that. Some issues get to the city council, zoning does, but some issues never get to the city council. They very rarely ever see a conditional use. They don't ever approve large-scale developments unless there's an appeal. So that a lot of the development issues never get to the city council. So that's why the changes to the Unified Development Code almost always go through the Planning Commission first. They don't legally have to, but it's better for them to do that so the city council can at least get the recommendations of the Planning Commission, people who sometimes see things the city council don't see.
You know, and one example is there's one that got built out that got changed, and it wasn't really a happy day for that neighborhood when they had the Aspen Ridge deal that got turned into the Hill Street.
Yeah, they had to come back and seek additional city council approval for changing.
Because they changed it the way they changed it, and of course their argument was, well, we can't make money on the other one, we bankrupted it, so we gotta start over again. New people, you know, same people actually, were in that. Wasn't that all Hank Broyles?
I think he wasn't with the first group, I didn't think, but or if he wasn't the principal person, but he ended up, I think, at the end.
He sold his
Did he sell his part of it?
part to the first, his partner in the first. He actually owned some of that property by the time it started. And he was the main guy working to get it. Because nobody
He was the principal spokesman, I think, when it came back.
Yeah. And his dad's made commercials for it.
Oh, was that right?
Yeah. Help get students over there. But then he made the deal to buy it.
One of the problems was they had
Start.
partially built it, and there were terrible erosion problems because when they left, when they went out and lost their money or whatever, they left a mess.
Yeah.
And the city council
Sound like
was
Rusty Knight.
sitting with the situation, do we let this mess just sit there and get worse and worse, or do we approve this other proposal that will at least clean up the mess and hopefully make it better than it is now? And that's what they finally decided to do. And Aubrey, of course, went to many, many meetings there, and he also witnessed the mess firsthand.
I've got photos when we did it.
But, you get problems like that, well, that shows the other side of a failed PZD that got redone, but, it didn't end up being any more compatible. Matter of fact, it was less compatible with the neighborhood, by the time it was done, because they added more density to do what they were doing.
Yes, and part of the selling point to the neighbors, some of them were told, well, it's not going to be student housing, it's going to be condos originally. And these will be people who own their homes and they fit in with the neighborhood. Well, other people said, no, it's university housing, we know it is. And that's how it ended up after it failed the first time.
But of course, you've got to, I think probably the developer was not necessarily lying. At one point, it seemed like developers thought that condos were, everybody's going to want to live in a condo from now on.
All
There
over
were
the city.
condos built everywhere, there's a lot of them still
Childhood.
vacant.
Old age.
Yeah, and that's one of the problems of this whole thing we're talking about is, we had a big boom. Everybody was thinking, oh, this is wonderful. We'll just build everything, develop everything, and every square inch of property in Fayetteville, and it didn't work.
Yeah, fortunately, we're not nearly in as bad shape as a lot of the country, even though we did go through that boom. We didn't boom nearly as fast as Bentonville and Rogers.
And we
some
didn't
of those
bust as
others.
hard.
Right, and they're really, we did get affordable housing though, at least, or Bentonville did, because my son moved up there and bought a house there. A friend of his had moved up there a year before and bought the identical house, which is a real nice thing when you live in a neighborhood. He's got the identical floor plan. And my son paid 10% less than what the person had paid a year before.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I just hope it's the bottom now. I hope it hadn't gone down farther, but for a long time, I remember when I was listening to city council back in the early part of this century, 2003, 2004, they were just saying, oh, we've got to have affordable housing. Well, we finally got affordable housing now, except no, the bank won't loan you money to buy it, but it's out there.
Just as a general question, in a situation where you've had a collapse of funds, they've gone belly up, so to speak, and they essentially have abandoned their property, if it's causing problems for the city and neighborhoods with erosion or whatever other issues, is condemnation on the table?
Well, I would think probably before we would actually seek to condemn it, we would instead attempt to force them, if we could, to control the erosion problems. We don't really have good state statutes on that. We can control stagnant water and that kind of stuff.
Uh-huh.
Weeds, there's no state statute that is similar to that talks about erosion problems.
But if, as far as problems, there is the potential for that, even if it's just a stick that's never used.
Well, I don't know. It takes a while sometimes for the law to catch up with what is happening. I think we now have better drainage ordinances and things like that where we require the developers to do more up front. And I think that should hopefully prevent that from being the problem in the future, as much as it was at Aspen Ridge is the poster child of it, where it was the biggest problem I think we had. Although we did have problems in the past. I remember even earlier than that, we had a development right above Mission that started filling up Clayos Lake because a guy just scraped the side of that mountain and then was surprised when it started heading down toward the lake. And that was
You're talking about
extremely,
Mission Hill?
yeah, it was extremely steep. And I know the developer, he came in from California, came in too late. All the good subs were gone. He just got the residue, and he didn't know what he was doing.
Took out Kings Boulevard
And
sometimes.
Undercut Kings. So it cost us a bunch of money to have to fix that up. And then he went bust and left. And that's, unfortunately, you get that sometimes. And since then, we've strengthened the hillside ordinance and strengthened our drainage ordinance. And then the other thing we have to do, we issued a stop work order on him to get that
Retaining wall
stop.
built, yeah.
Well, to get the erosion control in place that
Mhm.
could actually do something before we actually totally filled up. I guess it's Lake Lucille now. When
Yeah.
I was growing up, it's called Clayos Lake, who I
Yeah.
think was a developer over there. But, you know, unfortunately, it also requires the city to be forever vigilant. And not just the alderman. At this point, it's the city staff that has to see what's going on and then try to take action as quickly as possible. We don't like to issue stop work orders. Makes contractors really mad. But sometimes we have to do it in order to protect the environment and the neighbors.
Well, how about the assurance, bill of assurance bond situation?
Performance bond.
Performance bond, yes.
A performance bond would be a very unusual. We do have some bonding authority in the Unified Development Code if someone doesn't want to immediately put in sidewalks. And the reason that someone might not want to put sidewalks in a preliminary plan in a new neighborhood they're making is that if you put the sidewalks in before the homes are built, then when the homes get built, a lot of times the cement trucks go up on the sidewalks and crush them. And so then you end up with a subdivision with crushed sidewalks. So what we normally will allow is for them to put a bond up so after most of the houses are built, then the sidewalks will go in and hopefully survive. But to have any kind of bond to require somebody to build a subdivision, I don't think we really have authority for that, and I think it would probably be not a good idea because that would make development extremely expensive and drive up the cost of housing and everything else if you force people to get a bond that they would finish their project. Up until we had this housing crisis, we didn't have that problem very often.
Right.
So this is a very, very strange event. And hopefully, and we don't want to, housing is extremely weak now. We don't want to make it weaker by adding additional costs on them that they've never had to do before.
But now on Judge Cummings' property, when they discussed that, and one of the things I pointed out was that if you are going to space this out over time, which
25 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you need to make sure that no work's done on any other part of it that will start erosion or something.
Well, but we can do that because we have to approve any work, and if
But it takes somebody on the site every day, either a madman like me with a telephoto.
we're counting on you, Aubrey.
Or an actual inspector, an
Well,
actual person, not just a guy that inspects for standard things, but a guy with the plans in hand and knows the plans and maybe even help to approve them, to actually go look at it. And that takes more people out of the office, in the office. A few years ago it would, right now maybe not.
Well, we actually have run into some problems where some contractors have not built things according to the plans, and then we found out, and they built a sidewalk that's way too close to the street or something like that, and we say, well, you can't do it, and you have to remove it, put it back where it's supposed to be, which hadn't made the developer and the contractor real happy, and because of that, we are going to.
But they knew that beforehand, right?
No, he didn't know he was building it. He just measured incorrectly, the contractor.
Mm.
And what we're going to try to do to try to avoid that is require more plans in the field so that there can't be, to try to stop that mistake. You're never going to stop all mistakes.
No.
But to try to stop that mistake, because that's money just thrown away. And we don't like that. But on the other hand, are we going to say, oh, well, you made a mistake, so we'll just look the other way and we'll let the other neighbors worry about that in the future? We really don't feel like we should do that either. We should, we feel like he should have followed his plans, and the ultimate responsibility is with the developer and the contractor to follow the plans, but we hate to see waste. Here this wasn't terrible, it's like $2,500, but that's still money. And we don't like to see somebody have a waste like that, and so they are trying to do things. We're always trying to look at stuff. How can we do things to make it more efficient and it'll be fewer mistakes, fewer waste? And this is one of the later things that we've just discovered because of this particular problem that we ran into.
Well, see, with Aston Ridge, it may not be exactly true, but the amount of money that they spent clearing 28 acres, if they'd cleared only the first 10 or 12 and built it out, because they got the pipes in, they got the underground wiring, they got the sites laid out, even sidewalks, part of it. So, and pavement. If they built some buildings and sold those, they could eventually have built the rest on the other side. Very likely. They would have been eligible for another loan. You know, they've been making money off of it. But instead, they cleared all those trees, replaced all the soil, and put in part of the infrastructure there. Then they went bust.
Well, look at Ruskin Heights. They spent a ton of money and never sold anything. I mean,
Never even got it platted.
It's just,
They never got plat approval, so.
yeah. Well, we some of the stuff they wanted to have a different finish, in fact, on one of their curbs that we wouldn't accept. It wasn't according to city standards. That was the kind of the last issue before they went bust. So I mean, it's I tell you, I wouldn't be a developer. It's a risky business. You're taking a ton of money and you're betting you can sell.
Well, I think the planning commission actually functions better right now than 10 years ago or something. That I remember these nice young guys would be talking about the decorative trim on the buildings, the awning size and style. And I'm like, will this withstand a tornado? Do you ask them?
Hey, we still require, if anybody's going to build commercially, we still require them to meet commercial design standards.
They don't sound as silly right now to me as they used to be.
Anybody else got questions for Mr. Williams here?
I do.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't answer staff.
You're an elected official too. Okay. I know that what Aubrey started to talk about as far as the phasing, that can be done in PZDs.
Oh, yes.
Is there any other
Yeah, you can
way
fa-
that phasing is any other way that phasing is required, or is it just through PZDs?
No, you
or-
can also phase with preliminary plats, so that you might have a very large area that you have a particular plat showing your streets and your sidewalks.
Would that be an
your
LSD?
easements. Well, large scale development, you probably could do that too. That's when one owner is gonna maintain ownership of the entire plot, where a preliminary plat would be where owner is developing lots that he wants to sell to other people to build.
Okay.
And so, and we've had that, like Steel Crossing. It's giant preliminary plat, right? That's all the area south of the mall toward the creek. All that big commercial spot, all these giant roads. Well, that was all, and I think, part of a plat, but it was phased out over a lot of time. In fact, they didn't even build all the streets originally. They didn't have the Van Ash extension up. They didn't even build some of the cross streets that they have now, because they were building that as they were developing. And that could go over for a long period of time. So you can phase a preliminary plat also, and you probably could phase a large scale development if it was real big, where they built this part, but maybe they wouldn't even know who the tenant was going to be, like at Lowe's out on 62.
Mm-hmm.
Lowe's built theirs, but they weren't sure who their tenants were going to be. This was a much bigger shopping center than just Lowe's, so they had what's called outlots. And then as they developed that, then they developed the rest of the fringe around it where the outlots were. So you can phase these things over time too, even in that kind of situation.
And they can be required to complete, with the phasing, is there like a completion before they can
I
go
thi-
on to the next phase, or is it just kind of left up to the developers to decide what phase they're
No,
in
they
now?
usually, if it's an actual preliminary plat, and which is more often than what you would see in a big residential subdivision, they'll have it designated because it's gotta work together, the streets have to work together and the sidewalks and stuff, so that they would, in the Lowe's, they actually, I think, did most of the infrastructure, but they just left some of the building, places empty because they didn't know what people would want to be built there. So, and that was probably just as, when they sold them, that would be okay.
We talk about high and best use is a matter of opinion, and obviously somebody wanting to sell it would like to zone it or something.
Yeah, their high and best use is gonna be different from the neighbors.
Yes, and say Steel Crossing, when I moved here in the sixties, the highest and best use would have been a toss-up between quail hunting, duck hunting,
Yeah.
squirrel hunting, bass fishing,
Or brim fishing.
brim fishing.
I'd say more brim than bass, probably
Yeah.
not too much bass in that
Those-
creek.
A lot more goggle eyes.
But those ponds, there were some big ponds, and you only had to know a few landowners to have access to go through the whole area. There were a couple of grouches.
Well, I think the Steele family thought that maybe commercial was the way to go with that. And I was on the council at that time. That was actually a 5-3 vote.
Really?
3 council members did not want to zone it commercial. I was an evil person that voted for commercial. And my thought was, you know, this was the commercial heart of Fayetteville. And even back then, we were living on sales tax. And if we wanted to maintain our sales tax, we could have all these park programs and overlay the streets and have sufficient fire and police. We needed a revenue source. And I thought that was a good location for commercial to be. So I voted for it. I was
And it
not one
basically
to,
took all that outside Fayetteville to be that commercial center rather than
well, that's
the
in
village.
Fayetteville, it's just kind of on our
No,
border.
but originally it wasn't. To what year was it?
Yeah, well, that's true too. And anybody else got any questions for Mr. Williams?
Well, thanks. I appreciate you asking me to be here, and I also think that you all do a good. It's a good service to be able to talk together, so you all can
Yes.
hear about other issues that other neighborhoods have.
Well, it's good for you to come and get to discuss it with what may be a friendlier television audience.
Well, the television audience usually doesn't say bad things to me. It's the other people in the
No,
audience.
but
Yeah.
the people,
It's that live audience
they're
that
not
comes
all
after me.
cheering at council meetings.
All right. Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And,
Thank you, kid.
Thank you, Kit.
sure.
We appreciate your input.
Thanks. See you all.
All right.
Okay, our next deal is we have proposed bylaw amendment discussion. And I'm gonna let Julie explain what our problem is here, so we can figure out what we're gonna do.
Well, the last 2 months, the council members that were here had proposed some changes to the bylaws, and because we didn't have the previous bylaws in front of us, we did not realize that there are actually guidelines in the already adopted existing bylaws as to how to adopt or how to change them. So according to those, according to what was already adopted, to change bylaws, and I'm trying to find the part here, sorry.
Where was that? It was 7 something, wasn't it? No.
Sorry.
Article 8, Section 8.01, a proposed amendment to the bylaws.
That's right.
Yeah, that's
Thank you.
the one.
It was, an amendment may only be proposed by voting delegate of a neighborhood with full membership, which that was done. The vote on the amendment shall take place the meeting after the meeting in which it was proposed. And then amendments to these bylaws must be approved by 2/3 of those present, if it's a quorum. But it also stated that proposed amendments must be submitted to all the delegates in writing. Email is acceptable at least 2 weeks in advance of the meeting at which it will be voted on. So that is why I had emailed this out to you, everybody, and it's the 2 amendments that were proposed in the last 2 meetings. You all had held, one was the quorum number, and the other was the area that neighborhoods had to be a part of to be a member of the Council of Neighborhoods.
Right, as opposed to city limits, we went with,
Right.
The planning
went
area.
with planning limits, or
Mhm.
planning area. And so, next meeting, since everybody's got to look at this, we'll revote this just to make sure it's in there the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, do I understand that the vote to accept these amendments has already taken place?
Well, it had, but it did not follow the.
Okay, so this is still kind of an open
It's-
question?
It
Right.
is, yes.
But,
One
you
of the
know,
people in our neighborhood raised this issue, which I thought was something to think about. If participation is poor now, why do we think that having more people out there to neglect the Fayetteville Council of Neighborhoods is going to make a difference? Why, if we have more people to be absent, why is that a good thing? Well, you know, if we have now, let's say we have 12 people who don't come.
Right.
If we have 22 people who don't come, why is that better?
Don, I think you were the council member that actually had proposed that amendment. You want to?
the reason I proposed the amendment was because of our poor attendance during special times, and it seems like they come more often here lately. But the main reason is, unless something's wrong, unless there's a big issue, the council of neighborhood people don't show up.
That's right.
And, you know, we're working on contacting every month and this sort of thing, and we're trying to drive those people into submission to where they do actually show up. And it worked a little bit and then it didn't work, and it works a little bit and doesn't work. So, you know, I'm in a quandary myself. If you got any great ideas how to get these people to meetings, speak up. I'm ready.
My psychology about meetings is that if people aren't coming, maybe it's time to ask whether the meetings are really necessary.
Well, that's,
I know that's
It's a good
not an
point.
organization position perhaps,
well,
but, you know,
but
there it is.
It is a valid question, and I don't have an answer for you.
Right.
I
Because most
wish I
people,
did.
when they're asked, would say they hate to go to meetings, you know.
Well, we all do.
Yeah, that's what I say. And so, you know, if there's something that's really driving you to go, if somebody's putting in a dance hall across the street from your house, or if they're cutting
Then
down
they
all
show
the
up.
trees, then they show up because they really, you know, they think it's worth the trouble.
Let's start
But
having our meetings in a dance hall.
if they're across the street from your house. So if they're not coming, maybe there isn't a need for the meeting to take place in the first place.
They don't need us particularly at that time, but they need us later.
Uh-huh.
So,
If there's no meeting, there's no place to go talk.
There's no venue.
This is the first chance people get so many issues to discuss it openly.
and over the years, we have helped people and cured a lot of problems, and you know, come up with solutions to individual neighborhoods issues.
Right. When there was a problem, this
Yeah.
was a good place.
Yeah, and when there's not any problems, when things, you know, development slowed down to nothing, it's 100 degrees outside, and people are, you know, thinking, yeah,
Cranky.
why do I want to go to a meeting?
Right, right.
But I still think we need to be here for when they do have their issues. Like Jennings Plus over there, he had his issue, and you know, he came. He's got a specific thing that he really wanted to show up and get some answers to. and we were just fortunate enough to be able to give him a few answers, at least some ideas.
So, then,
Beats me.
yeah. The other thing was, you know, if we have more people to be absent, why should the quorum be less?
Well,
If we can't get 6, what makes us think we can get 3?
well, we can generally get 3
Or
or 4
whatever.
or 5.
Yeah,
But,
A lot of times we just had 5 instead of 6.
yeah.
but we're talking about the extension to the planning areas,
Yes.
which are neighborhoods, they're Fayetteville neighborhoods, and they're affected by Fayetteville actions.
And do you think they are then more interested than the people who are already in the
Hey,
city
if
of
there's
Fayetteville?
if there's a big old,
butterfly that-
no, not just a butterfly, you know me, don't you? Butterfly crosses the road, I get excited.
Right.
You know, talk about changing your meeting times to another, maybe a lunch hour at the library,
Oh
or
my
a Saturday
God.
morning at 10
Saturday
at the
morning.
library, or a time where maybe family people who have children. I mean, I know a lot of people who 6 o'clock is it's after school,
Right.
it's dinner time, they're getting supper on the
There,
table.
there is that, and,
I don't know, just
I don't know, we changed over to our last Thursday of the month.
And we changed it to
And we
6,
changed
pushed
the
it back
time, too.
based on feedback that we had gotten, you know,
The
and
people
it
like
got one
6.
more person here, because Stan couldn't attend
Yeah,
before.
that's good. One more's good.
Right,
Sounds like-
but on the question of the outlying
Yeah.
planning zone things, they have major frightening issues.
Uh-huh.
And when they come here finally, they don't even have a vote.
Mhm.
And they should have a
are
vote
you leaving us
I feel
now?
terrible that I have
if
to
they
be somewhere
come
at
go
7.
the trouble.
Okay, well, you're late.
I apologize. It was fun.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Thank you,
Email me.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
I'll
Rhonda.
anyway.
Ethel, also, the planning area is what the planning staff, they look at that area when they're doing the master street plan and the long-term planning as a potential area that's gonna be annexed into Fayetteville. Now, whether or not that means they need to have a seat on the council of neighborhoods, that is up to you guys. But I think that was why the planning area was actually considered the designated possible amendment.
Right,
Because the people that had a problem
That's where they
a couple
would
of
be.
meetings ago, they were
Yes.
they were right on the line there, and they needed their problems addressed. And, you know, they came to us hoping for some help or solution or anything to their problem.
right.
And once again, you know, they were just out of the city limits, which was just out of our bylaws. And so we wanted to include them. They do have an active neighborhood, and, you know, they have a large POA. And what we need to do is we need to figure out how to get more of these POAs to come here. Instead of when they've got a problem showing up, they need to show up at the meetings every month. I mean,
I think their meetings are at pools.
well, generally
bars.
their meetings are at pools, and that does create another problem there, and they have a barbecue with it. So, you know, are you willing to sponsor the barbecues in the pool?
I'd buy the first
Think about
round
it.
if we got
Okay, well,
Since you were discussing that, I have heard of a suggestion. We actually had an MBA intern that kind of helped research some other cities, what they're doing for their community outreach. And one suggestion that she had, I think pertains very much to what you were just discussing as far as ways to get people involved. And actually there was one city that she researched quite heavily that would have a monthly potluck dinner and discussion. And it was among city staff and neighborhood people, and it was actually another university town, so there were some university people. And it became, again, you know, everybody's busy, so I'm not sure how effective it would be, but it worked very well for that town. So that's just, you know, a suggestion that they had come up with.
well, it's a possibility. I mean, when we have our Christmas potluck, we have great attendance.
Yes.
Not this past Christmas.
That's true. That's true. I don't know if it was my fault or
I
not.
don't, no, I don't think so. And so I had 22 finger sandwiches left over.
Oh, no.
I gave them away. I mean, it wasn't a problem, but it was.
Really? I thought I was told that was canceled already.
It was, some of us were doing.
Yeah.
Am I on your list, okay?
You should be.
Okay, I thought I was, and then, I was out of town for a considerable amount of time around the last meeting and over into this month. And so I think I might have just missed something, but I got it in an indirect way, so it was okay.
Now, the email, I'm glad you brought that up because the neighborhood's email list is changing. I have switched it over to the Gov Delivery, which is the city's email subscriber system, because it maintains email services much better than our in-house city.
server,
Okay.
And it checks for bounce backs and things like that. And then you can either stay on the subscription or unsubscribe yourself. You
I
can
see.
manage that.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it is going through that now.
Okay.
And so if you get left off,
Let me know and I'll find
Call
out what the
Julie.
problem is. Yeah.
Yeah.
and
Okay.
we'll try to fix that.
She'll call you and tell you she's sick. So you won't get
Any other business? We took care of him first.
I do have an announcement.
Oh,
Well,
good.
let's hear it.
Well, last month you guys got to see the Community Link
Right.
presentation. We are going to be having our public launch press conference of Community Link. The last pieces that we were waiting on are now in place, and it is going to be at the library August 9th,
Okay.
which is a Tuesday at 11 a.m. And it's even better than it was when I showed it to you last month.
Well, great. And I noticed some people are using Commonplace.
Some people are using Commonplace. Their community organizers have now left,
Mhm.
and I believe they have a local volunteer that's going to continue to administer that site.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, that's good because that's another area where we can
But
Yeah.
that is the site that is not the city site.
get out information. I have no report because I'm just busy trying to come up with stuff for Kip Williams. So,
It is sensational.
and neighborhood updates. We'll start with you since you got
Oh.
your problems over with. You probably don't have any updates.
That's been the talk of the neighborhood. I don't think there's been anything else.
We had a good response. We have, as you know, a penitential site in University Heights that's irritating us all the time, a rental outfit at the corner of Maple and Oliver Avenue. And earlier this summer, but in the very, very hot parts of the summer, somebody was burning brush at that site underneath the power lines. And so, of course, there was a lot of activity on the discussion list in the neighborhood about that. And
Somebody called the fire department.
yeah, one of the neighbors took a photograph and on her camera and sent it off to the fire department, I guess. And then another neighbor, well, actually, our neighbor and alderperson, Rhonda, was involved, and Sarah Lewis went over and talked to the people who were doing that and pointed out the utility wires and so forth. And so the brush pile was removed, and we were all very happy that Neighborhood Cooperation had scored one small victory. But of course, since our neighborhood, we're never satisfied. Somebody says, well, when are you gonna get them to cut the brush in the back?
Well, I
So
see
it's
those
a-
are part of us in town are trying to make it a wildlife-friendly city.
Yes, well, of course, this place has a purely gravelled yard, I mean, rock, the whole place, so it's maybe friendly to lizards and scorpions and things like that.
But he did have a brush pile, or some living brush.
Yes. No, it was not living, it was being burned. It was
That's what they were burning.
piled up there,
Oh.
like dead trees and shrubs that had
they
died
were
in the
trying to burn it like
ice
in the
storm
sea.
and the drought and
Yeah.
a few other things.
Maybe the fire department explained the rules about outdoor burning.
Mhm.
You know, we've had a burn ban for the last,
Forever.
no, it was a red alert. It finally got to be a ban after about first 6 or 7 weeks of the
Mhm.
drought.
And then you've got all the brown recluses that are coming out of these old closets and basements, you know. It's,
You know about that, don't you?
Yes, I do.
it's, anybody that knows them knows more than they want to.
Well,
But
thank
other
you.
than that, hey, we're
Okay.
surviving. I still live where the sidewalk ends, and I figure with the heat, the sidewalk will still be in need of completion sometime this fall, but, you know, we'll see how it goes.
It's
And
hot.
then we'll have rain, so you'll
I wouldn't be
see.
for concrete.
And I'm gonna email Julie with a couple of agenda ideas. I need to talk with JP about a couple of things she called me about. So we'll go from there on the agenda list.
August.
Yeah, and so
Sure.
we'd like to adjourn.
I motion we adjourn.
So, second.
Okay, well,
All in
together,
favor?
we will make a difference. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Aye, aye.
Okay, carries. Thank you.
Everybody gets to speak.